Good day to you and welcome to Contact Center Showcase and the special edition Lessons from the Lockdown. I'm Rod Jones, your host, and my guest today is Steve Weston. Hi, Steve.
Hey, Rod. Good to see you.
Well, nice to have you here all the way from Washington, D.C. Now, Steve is CEO of SKWeston Company, and previously we've had some discussions. Steve's a consultant, analyst, running managed services and outsourcing advisory to clients right across the United States. Steve, would you like to just expand a little bit on that, on what your company does and how you see the industry?
Sure. Thanks, Rod. Again, it's good to be here. So our company, we have three major areas, but we focus in on contact center consultancy. So we're building global operating models for many Fortune 100, 500 companies around CX. And so as part of that CX, it's people, process, technology. We design, implement these models. And as an outcome of those models, though, we also look at outsourcing strategies, global strategies form around the globe. Also technology strategy, especially in the cloud space, in actually supporting these models.
Then you're just the man we need to talk to, because I think a lot of people are looking at the current situation, the realities of COVID-19 and the implications of that. But I'd like us just to take a back step, if I may, and probe on your view of the BPO global business services world, the way we saw it towards the end of 2019 into January, even February, where this thing was only happening in China and unlikely to affect us. So was it a bright and rosy world that you looked at and potential for expanding the BPO services?
Sure. It was actually, it was a fascinating, probably still is a fascinating world. Very much changing even up to February, in that you always have your transactional business in the outsourcing world and in the BPO world. But what was really changing is, from an outsourcing perspective, is companies were actually pulling back from certain overseas locations, more because they were looking for value add. CX is so important to all of them, and they realized the value of that. So what they were looking for is an actual partner, not just a general BPO or an outsourcer, to actually help support their CX strategy, frankly, lead their CX strategy around the globe, providing the technology that they don't want to invest in, especially when you're talking about AI and bots and a lot of the automation. So they wanted a true partnership, not just a button seats.
Interesting. So were you already seeing a move away from low-cost pure voice towards more sophisticated self-service, analytics, robotics, etc.?
Exactly. And a lot of that data also showed up in Ryan Advisory's Omnibus survey that just came out. As you see a shift to some new marketplaces, a lot of that has to do with that full digital voice and digital strategy that companies were looking for. This is how, frankly, marketplaces like South Africa have opened up, because that is something they offer. And so companies were already looking at new countries, new strategies, and no longer were just looking for a cost play, because I think they realized in the long run what that did negatively to their overall customer experience.
But no, you were sitting back in middle of February, early March with clients on managed services. You have them in different locations throughout the world, if I remember.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Where are those locations that you've been running services, Steve?
So we've been running them, frankly, all over. We're in Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the US, now Africa, Europe. I would say our main areas were in Europe, were UK and Germany, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Brazil, and some of the Caribbean countries, as well as some in China, a lot in the Philippines, and more migrating in the Asia portion to Vietnam and countries like that, and out of China and the Philippines.
I didn't realize your spread was so wide. So sitting in your office in Washington, D.C., you have a global view of as this pandemic started sweeping across the globe. So let's have a look at what started happening mid to late March into April across the sites and the geographies that you have vested interests in. What were you seeing?
Well, it's interesting because what it did show was an actual, frankly, a hole in some of the strategies that our clients were implementing, and a hole being they start to realize, okay, I have to lock down my contact center. I need to go home. Well, we don't have the infrastructure to go home, or we don't have the bandwidth or the broadband to go home, depending on what areas of the country you're in. It poked holes in outsourcing strategies in terms of location for that exact same reason. You look at, certain countries, both, frankly, all around the world, the ones that surfaced were the ones where they realized they had to completely shut down, no ability to have people work at home. And now what are they going to do? So they have to bring some of that back to the States, but they lack the technology infrastructure. When I talk about technology infrastructure, I'm talking about cloud applications that allows you to move work around the globe seamlessly and within days, so you don't have to shut down.
Okay. And then the shutdowns, the ones that we hear about, for example, the very rapid shutdown of the industry in Philippines, for example, that left a lot of Australia and New Zealand high and dry in terms of services. You have clients in the same situation?
We do. And so they had come to us to look at, can we get it, can we stand something up quickly so we're not shut down completely and we're out of business.
Do you have any war stories about a rapid deployment of work from home agents that happened seamlessly because of, and what I'd be interested in is because of what?
Right. So we have, good examples. We had a major client in the Philippines, outsourcing in the Philippine area, had to completely shut down, completely realized that there was no work at home ability based on where their agents are located at home. So we actually were able to take them off of what the platform that they were on, which was a premise-based platform. And we're actually able to stand up a cloud platform within 5 days. And the way you're able to do that, frankly, is, with cloud, you just need a laptop and a soft phone on that laptop, and you can go anywhere in the world.
Yep. And what sort of scale was that on, Steve?
So we were talking about, in this case, about 1,500 agents they had lost, and so we were able to then move some. And by the way, it wasn't just the Philippines with this company. They also had locations here in the States that had a shutdown. So they had the staff to handle the volume, believe it or not, but they didn't have the technology to do that. So we got people at home. We were able to do, a cloud as a service and stand them up on a cloud platform very quickly. And they were up and running and back in business. And the issue with this one is they were getting calls because this was a revenue producing operation that actually supports a lot of home services, like streaming services, where their volume was going through the roof. So time was of the essence, and because every day they were losing revenue, but this gave them that capability to get back in business.
Okay, excellent. As I said, we're starting to pick up some of these war stories that deserve medals for redeployment very quickly and agility. And you're starting to see, and I'd be interested in your opinion on that, is those organizations that didn't necessarily have a disaster recovery plan to cope with a pandemic, but they had the plan that needed a tweak at the end. So, I'm seeing operations that were semi-prepared. Nobody was totally prepared. But has that been your observation as well?
It has. I mean, this was completely uncharted waters. So most of these companies obviously have disaster recovery plans. had off-site data centers, so they can move a lot of their systems to another data center if possible. But this again poked holes in those disaster recovery plans. This was something no one anticipated. And it's also, again, not only from a technical perspective, but even from an outsourcing perspective as to, there were some holes that they didn't think about when they went to a global strategy and have business scattered around from Asia to Africa. What was the capability if a disaster occurred there?
An interesting observation I've been looking at all over the world is in some locations, there was actually a spike and improvement in KPIs the minute you move agents back into working from home. What is your opinion of that, or your observations? Is it sustainable, or are you starting to see a tail?
Sure, and that's a really good question, because even in normal circumstances, we have a whole work at home practice. So we have a lot of data from over the last several years on how successful work at home operations are. And generally, yes, you see an improvement in attrition, you see improvement in handle time, and most importantly, you even see improvement in overall quality and CSAT scores, because a person is focused, they're not distracted, and heads down. So it's a good complemental strategy in terms of, I don't envisioning everything just going to work at home for this reason. It takes a special individual to be in an isolated environment. And even those who when you test them personally, who are really qualified to be in an isolated environment, the burnout rate is generally about 6 months for those people, in terms of they start to realize they need to be out, they need to be with people, number one. Number two, you miss the overall collaboration that occurs even in a contact center, exchange of ideas and thoughts and strategies. You tend to start to lose that. And so what I'm saying is, work at home strategy should be an add-on. Companies realize they need to have it, but it's something you're probably going to end up rotating staff in and out of to prevent that burn rate, to make sure it's sustainable. But it's a complement to your brick and mortar. I don't see brick and mortar going away.
Well, this is where we start moving into the last part of this discussion, which is gazing into a very murky crystal ball, into a very murky future. But if we take ourselves 6 or 9 months down the line, assuming that we have stabilization, there is a whole new tomorrow. How do you see the whole new tomorrow for BPO, outsourcing, managed services, global business services? Where's your view, sitting in your throne in DC, viewing the planet?
Right. And this is obviously, it's all unknown territory. So it's, what I know today, there are two major areas I think we are focusing in on, we're seeing companies focus in. One is reanalyzing their overall outsourcing strategy. They're looking at new countries, different countries where they have that. There are certain countries that did really well in disaster recovery and moving people to work at home within 3 to 5 days. Frankly, your country was one of those that did a very effective job in getting people to home in a BPO environment. So they're looking at those.
Thank you for that. And just now, before we finish, I'd like you to expand a little bit on that.
Sure. The second, and this is the unknown, and this goes to a little bit of the politics of the situation, and this is for the US and even Western Europe. You're going to definitely see everyone's reanalyzing their supply chains and the whole global supply chain issue, because this, again, poked holes in that strategy. So you're going to see some or quite a bit of supply chains coming back home to US, various European countries. Now, does that mean, so they're going to bring those home, is that going to affect your overall outsourcing strategy or your call center strategy and putting it more within your country or stateside versus offshore as they do today? I have a feeling that some of that's going to get swept up, where some of that's going to come home. And if it does come home, you've got an increase in cost, whether it's here or in Europe, that's when a lot of those jobs probably would go into a work at home environment or a broader work at home environment, to a brick and mortar environment.
Would that be strategically to reduce the operational costs of?
Exactly, because you're going to have increased costs both on the production of your supply chain, but also the support of your supply chain for your customers. And so you have to find ways to mitigate those costs. And this is probably, if some of this does get swept along the way back to home, that's probably where they're going to look at it from a cost reduction.
Okay, I see that. And you touched on it earlier. Do you envisage a hybrid between on-premises, work from home, and what sort of ratios do you envisage? Not necessarily in the US, but elsewhere in the world.
In terms of
work from home versus premise-based.
Right. Again, I see this, I've seen this all across the globe, where countries, operations in various countries, even outside the US, have all gone to a hybrid at this point. They realize that this was a hole in their disaster recovery. And I brought up South Africa as an example, and where a lot of the BPOs there that we work with were able to get to a work at home environment. And they're now seeing some of the success of the productivity, the cost, so they can social distance within their operations in brick and mortar, and still keep some people at home and then rotate people in and out. This is truly going to be the new norm going forward, no matter what area of the world you're at, that the areas of the world that actually have the broadband capability to do this. And like I said, we've seen in certain countries that's not there yet. And you see that in some of the Asian countries, and frankly, in some of the Caribbean locations in nearshore for US, also has holes in that area.
So are you seeing, in fact, that South Africa would have opportunity going forward, having weathered the storm perhaps better than some of the other geographies?
Correct. So there was a trend prior to the crisis in terms of countries around the globe really starting to recognize not only the CX portion of success of your outsourcing marketplace, but the technology piece, the data analytics piece that made you unique. But now, on top of that, when companies are looking for countries that actually have that capability to do work at home, this has drastically increased the attractiveness of a marketplace like South Africa. And again, it shows up in a lot of the Ryan Advisory Omnibus surveys.
We were very pleased to see South Africa back in second place again.
Right.
Watch the space next year.
Yeah, so South Africa, India, popped up again in the #1 spot, as you know, and a lot of that has to do with the digital space, as well as their capability to do work at home in various areas of India. So you're seeing again a change in direction for a lot of companies that understand those countries support those kind of strategies.
So this digitization, digital migration that I think we as consultants and analysts have been talking to clients about for years happened, was given that nudge into reality.
Exactly.
Disaster. Steve, just before we wrap on this, do you have a couple of, I call it my lessons from the lockdown, that lessons that clients, operators need to really take seriously, what lessons have come out? And outsourcing clients, what are their lessons about the roadmap to the future?
Right.
You've got a couple of gems in that space, so I really would like to share with them.
Sure. Well, I think we've touched on some of them, and the gems, frankly, are both stateside as well as outsourcing size. One is you've got to diversify. You've got to broaden your strategy. Think excuse the expression, outside the box in terms of not only your customer engagement, but your agent engagement. So, they realized that they completely were caught with their pants down, frankly, in terms of that diversity and getting a work at home program, getting the right technology to support that. And so, this is lesson learned here was that, there's about a 15% engagement level on the cloud versus premise technology side of call centers. This has drastically expedited the move to cloud, where where they thought it would get up to 30% in 10 years. That's probably now been cut in half, because companies realize if they need to be flexible so they can move volume and people across the globe. You can't do that very effectively with a premise-based system, but you can very effectively with a cloud-based system. So that's probably the major nugget that all of them have learned and are now, expediting going that direction.
It's think agility, and both in terms of technologies and the people.
Exactly.
That's just about a wrap on it. Do you wish to do a shout out to anybody out there in the world of BPO contact centers and our global network?
Sure. Well, we have great BPO partners around the globe. And I just want to thank all of them. They have done a tremendous job at trying to help support our client base, and to all their employees who've done an amazing job of keeping a lot of these businesses going. I really tip my hat to all of them. They've just done an amazing job from the agent all the way up to the executive level. So we greatly appreciate that.
Wonderful. Well, that's a wrap, Steve. So, thanks to Steve Weston for joining us on Lessons from the Lockdown, and wish you well, wish you be safe, be happy, and keep smiling. So, Steve, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Rod. Appreciate it.